I would like to take a moment before we get into today's main episode and to talk about my sponsor for the podcast. Podmatch is a new podcasting site dedicated to all podcasters. The platform helps hosts get connected with potential guests to appear on their show, as well as allow guests to find podcasts that will give them a chance to share their story. Podmatch offers many tools to help organize your page, from to-do lists to episode planning to potentially appearing on a leaderboard. Podmatch has it all. The best part, you have the potential to get paid. And who doesn't like to get paid from home? I like to. With an easy sign up, you can start connecting with podcasters and guests immediately. I have been a part of Podmatch since the beginning of May, and I have got to say that it was the best decision I've ever made because Podmatch helps your podcast grow. It helps you get connected with people that have very interesting, very compelling background stories that are just waiting for their story to be shared. So if you are a host or guest and would like to start building professional relationships, explore more opportunities, and have your story shared, I highly suggest that you sign up with Podmatch today by going to joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to start expanding your network in seconds. I would like to give another huge thank you to Podmatch for sponsoring this episode. Now on to our main episode, and again, you can sign up at joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to begin your podcasting journey today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lethal Venom Podcast, the show where I talk about anything I want with the honest to God truth, no lies told. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Aaron Scott. Aaron steps onto the literary and podcast scene with a bold claim. You possess the divine ability to reshape reality, but this power has been buried beneath generations of falsehood and mental chains. He explores how social, religious, and economic systems profoundly shape our consciousness while revealing why we so often lose ourselves within them. His assertion is that the path forward is integration. By cultivating conscious awareness as daily practice, we create space between stimulus and response where true transformation begins. When we align our inner world through self-examination, our external reality reorganizes around that clarity. As a result, our relationships improve, work becomes more purposeful, and we stop disappearing within systems that were never designed for our fulfillment. So, Aaron, I appreciate you so much for coming on today. I cannot wait for a conversation today.
Thanks for having me, Noah. I'm excited as well.
Now, feel free to introduce yourself and share with my listeners a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah, sure. So, I think that in kind of responding to your introduction, a big part of kind of my effort is to speak the truth. I think that so much in this world is so kind of obfuscated. People don't know up from down, and in addition to that, there's like so much information out there, but people are starving for meaning. And I think it's a function of kind of the way that we've elected to, kind of like set up society. And I think that people are really kind of like not aware of, the systems that we've structured, why they're there, what the origin stories are behind them. We're kind of like brought into this world. We go through, schooling. We graduate. We try to go to college. We do kind of what we're told we should be doing, or what we think is the right thing to do, or what we think the right path is. But in truth, well, I know that the large percentage of us don't really examine, right, what that path is based off of, or certainly we don't look at it from a sort of self-reflecting standpoint. And in many ways, we're kind of told to push ourselves aside in order to accommodate this path that's been laid out in front of us, right? So, for me, kind of as I've always kind of been conscious of uh, these systems or this program, if you will, and never really felt like it made a whole lot of sense. Certainly wasn't structured to accommodate, everybody. It seemed like it was kind of out laying out a certain track for certain people, or based on the way that they think. For example, in school, we all know what the SATs are or the ACTs are, but in truth, this is only one measurement of intelligence, right? So what happens to all the other people who aren't considered, smart or intelligent? What about the people who have, extremely high EQ, or are extremely artistically inclined, or are, again, learned through spatial recognition or through other methodologies where they could, where they can really shine. Well, in truth, this is because we've set up systems and structured society that values certain traits, um, that is looking for individuals that are able to kind of fit as a cog into a wheel. And I have always kind of felt like, um, society, or like the jobs that were available or what the economy was looking for didn't always kind of align with me, and I wanted to kind of look deeper into that. And I've been on this journey doing that for probably about 20 years now, and I'm really kind of pushing forward this effort to awaken people to this kind of hidden infrastructure that exists across a number of systems, across a number of institutions, and it's kind of formed this global web that people aren't really aware of, right? So that's really kind of been my effort over the past couple of years. I have a book coming out as well called Before We Forget: The Guide to Personal and Collective Awakening, which is coming out actually in 6 days now. It seems like I've been working on it forever, but so I'm excited about that. But hopefully that gives you kind of a quick background on kind of who I am and where I'm coming from.
From the studies that you've been able to look into, what's been some of the more problematic issues that you've faced when studying these issues?
Yeah, so I kind of want to also say that, and I didn't get into this, and I apologize. I have a lot of kind of real world practical experience, if you will, in the business world. I founded, um, you know, uh, two alternative therapeutic companies. I've worked on Wall Street for a little bit less than 2 decades, so I've kind of been there, done that. And I've had a foray into a number of, I guess, kind of um, places or vantage points that people don't typically get access to. So, I guess to kind of I think list that as important because it gives people kind of an understanding that, this isn't just about kind of me doing independent research. This is about me, kind of looking at my experiences and then diving deeper into kind of other theoretical frameworks, or um, really kind of philosophical structures or theories that underpin, the modern world, right? So, for example, we were talking about education before, in the United States and in the Western countries. Certainly, this exists through many countries in Europe. We are indoctrinated, or we are educated under what's called the Prussian model, which is a model that teaches students to kind of value themselves based on their output, right? So they're taught to regurgitate information. They have to memorize and regurgitate. They're graded based on that. They're given, gold stars or grades A through F, pass, fail, right? So this is forming a psychological framework, also a framework for kind of self-identity, where they look at themselves, or the value that they can, uh, rather their intrinsic value is based on their output or their utility, right? And this is a 12-year regimented kind of methodology of structuring a child's psyche, so that when they go into the world, this performative based identity is kind of all encompassing, right? So, kind of like take a step back and think about it. You know, um, Most people are, hell bent on achieving and competing and, making the grade and moving up to higher education so that they can get a better job and they can be successful, right? So, but in truth, this is all structured and formulated. This isn't like we aren't just operating naturally in this enterprise, right? This is all manicured. This is all indoctrinated and ingrained into our brains as the only way to live. And this is by design. And it was done that way because the founders of our education system were industrial capitalists at the turn of the 20th century. They needed docile workers that were focused on, working hard, following authority, and churning things out. And we've created this kind of like this beast as a result of it, this ecosystem that is solely focused myopically on industry, on money, on competition, on capitalism, right? And this is the heart and soul of at least the Western world, right? So, but kind of my point is that this isn't kind of all, cupcakes and butterflies. This has real psychological effects on people. It pushes really everything outside of that framework to the back burner, whether it's personal relationships, personal health, sense of, identity, value systems, right? I mean, it skews things so far to one side of the equation, it just creates massive trauma for people that they don't really understand or realize. And this extends, past the individual identity conversation. We have healthcare system in our country that is only driven by profit motives, where we don't treat, we don't cure diseases. We only treat symptoms. We only suppress symptoms. We are looking to improve and sustain the pharmaceutical companies and the medical industry itself, not really caring about the individual, right? Our institutions and our systems are sanctified, but the human beings, which are the ones who are supposed to be taken care of, are pushed to the wayside. So, kind of like very quickly giving you hopefully a background on where I'm coming from.
In terms of modern systems like capitalism, religion, government, and education, how do these modern systems usually tend to manipulate our perception of reality?
Yeah, I think that well, first of all, religion is a very unique beast because religion kind of laid the original groundwork for, or rather the blueprint for what I call kind of like the hierarchical institutional structure. It certainly wasn't the original hierarchical structure, but it sanctified it. And it's a blueprint that we use to this day, across corporations. We internalize it as well, where we look to authority figures for for answers. We don't think critically about things. We just accept. There's this again. There's this embedded docility that is important when you're trying to control people. When you're trying to structure a society that is that is in many ways manipulated. But and how that works is that with religion was not set up to foster or to nourish our spiritual connection with source, the divine, God, whatever we want to call it, right? In truth, it was structured to separate us from this power, um, this force, right? And it did so by saying that, look, you want to be, you want to have a connection to God or source, you must go through us. We are the third party intermediary. You must kiss the ring. You must attend this institution of learning. You must come to church. You must follow these doctrines. You must obey this moral code. So it was really kind of a kind of salvation through submission. This was the blueprint, and it extended itself across, really kind of highly concentrated in the Catholic Church, but it exists in other forms through other Abrahamic faiths. And there was really kind of like this institutionalization of religion across all religions and Eastern philosophies, where again, I spoke about this before, but the institution was placed above everything else, where it was the institution that was sanctified, and the believers and the followers were kind of like used in a way that wasn't nourishing them or giving them any real spirituality, right? So these systems themselves kind of operate in different ways and in unique ways. Religion certainly uh, had again is kind of the original structure from which we've really kind of set up this entire societal model, if you will, and it exists and it's pervasive to this day across, really globally across a number um, of our sacred institutions and also our social systems that we occupy daily.
Why is it so many people feel spiritually disconnected, and what's the path back to inner truth?
Yeah, well, I mean, they feel spiritually disconnected because they have been clinging to and they've been dependent upon these religious systems, right? The connection back to spiritual truth is to kind of rehab what we've been severed from, which is we need to reconnect to our own individual connection to source, our own internal connection, right? Which is unique to all of us, but in truth, and this is echoed throughout millennia and even to this day. it's there's very much a common thread because we're all uh, similar beings, right? We all have the same mental, emotional, and spiritual construct, right? We're all kind of operating, we're experiencing this reality through similar faculties, et cetera, et cetera. So in truth, what happens is when you're able to disconnect, when you're able to separate yourself from institutions that don't nourish your real spirituality, that don't nourish your true connection, and you're kind of, you kind of come back to yourself. And a good way to do that is through there's a number of ways, but I think a really good way is through meditative practices, through somatic practices or rituals, if you will. So like at the end of the day to decompress, or in the morning to kind of like ground yourself in presence, and to not allow yourself to get pushed and pulled by the external world, right? Like so many of us, we're kind of like out there and we feel like we're being pulled in one direction or another direction. We are being manipulated through algorithms on social media. We are being manipulated through like the music and the placement of notes and tunes and cinematic kind of games through in movies and TV shows. Right? It's all kind of scripted, and it's about not allowing the external world to control you and giving you back sovereignty, giving yourself back sovereignty so that you are you are taking ownership over your reality. You're not letting somebody else dictate that reality. And that's what really kind of, in my opinion, coming back to a spiritual presence or experience is all about. It should be about, grounding, rooting yourself in your truth and then living empowered and with sovereignty on the back of that.
You had kind of mentioned earlier about how people tend to get pulled to one side or the other. How how big of a role does social media play in all this?
I think social media is interesting because I think that there are tremendous benefits to it as well. I think that you're seeing a lot, with Noah, with platforms like your podcast and um, other just general social media platforms like TikTok or Instagram or what have you, right? YouTube. They've become platforms for truth where people can speak their personal truth and they can share ideas and they can discuss topics that typically weren't discussed, right? Freely.
Mhm.
And so we've created this kind of whole ecosystem of information kind of transfer, which is really, really powerful and is kind of throwing a wrench into the kind of like propaganda machine, which exists and has existed for decades, right? So it's kind of beautiful in that sense, but at the same time, um, social media algorithms operate off of particular cues. And I think that it's obviously kind of experience, right? Where if you click on something, it will and like stay on it for a certain amount of time, you'll get fed more of that, I guess, genre or theme, right? So
Oh,
like, so the
mhm.
idea is kind of, and again, the idea with all this stuff within kind of like my whole effort in my book is to bring this kind of level of awareness to your day-to-day life. Because when you are aware, when you're conscious of what's going on, your whole experience is very different. Where instead of being sucked into something, you're seeing it, you're removing yourself from it, you're visual, or rather you're viewing it, you're hearing it, but you're not being, again, pushed and pulled by it. This is a big difference, right? So I think that social media can be hugely uh, empowering and beneficial and impactful on a global level. But I think you have to just, again, with all this stuff, you kind of like be aware of how it's operating and then kind of use that to your advantage.
There's this thing that a lot of people do that's called conspiracy theories and kind of come up with these wild theories. Are all conspiracy theories true, or should people tend to stay away from conspiracy theories due to the fact that they can be very misleading?
Yeah, well, I think you hit it on the head. I think the problem is that you got to get on this slippery slope where, first and foremost, you create this kind of like victimhood mentality where like you are not in control and like, other people are pulling the strings. But in truth, this is a massive illusion. Every system, every structure, every institution is only has power because of the masses, because of the people. Now, people don't see it for what it is, but I mean, if you look at anything, if you look at um, even, if you look at like the price of corn or eggs, if you look at the price of oil, if you look at the value of money, I mean, these are all sustained by us supporting companies that manufacture scarcity or willing to play along in the game of um, of kind of like this made up financial system, right? So as soon as like if we were to kind of say, look, government, here's the deal. Like, this is fun, but we don't want to pay taxes anymore, right? We don't feel like we're being represented. We don't want to pay taxes. I mean, what's the government going to do? They're not going to unleash an army on the 300 million citizens of the country, right? So again, all of these systems are upheld by us agreeing to it, us going along with it, and this goes across our most quote unquote sanctified, you know, systems and processes, just the way it is. Now, in truth, there are countless examples of conspiracies, right? This is not, I think to kind of say that conspiracy theories are just theories would be to kind of like be sleepwalking through your life. In fact, our entire economic system, capitalism, is really dependent upon conspiracies. We have let's take the price of oil, for example. The price of oil is not dictated by real supply demand economics. It's dictated by a cartel of, 8 countries that own the majority of the oil or control the majority of the oil across the globe, and they dictate the pricing, right? So this is a pricing conspiracy, right? The massive opioid epidemic was conspiracy. I mean, people were saying that, oh, there's this company, these companies are uh, they are pushing opioids onto our citizens or taking advantage of it. It was called a conspiracy theory. In truth, that's exactly what they were doing. Same thing with the tobacco industry, right? I mean, so like to say things that are all conspiracy theories would be to kind of like be completely blind, right? But again, the problem is when, first of all, a lot of the stuff can kind of like get out of control and people are making connections that aren't really there. They're not linear. They're kind of like basing it off of stuff that isn't concrete. And then they get into problems again with like this kind of like slippery slope and they get excited or they, et cetera, et cetera. So and it's hard to kind of discern in my opinion, but I think the overriding point in my opinion is that regardless of the conspiracy, regardless of what's going on, the conspiracies at play here can only maintain themselves, or the power structures that are kind of are kind of in for or kind of pushing these conspiracies across the globe, only are only allowed to persist because we allow them to persist. If we collectively said enough is enough, again, whether it's pricing, whether it's policy, whether it's this, that, and the other thing, like if you're forget conspiracy, but I mean, like if, for example, if 200 million people across our country were believe that there was genocide going on in Gaza, right? And we marched to our capital and said, if you don't if you don't force the Israeli government to stop what they're doing, uh, what's our government going to do? Well, again, what are our leaders going to do? If we went in there and we physically removed somebody, right, and said you can, I mean, like, so again, there's this illusion of power that really isn't there. The conspiracies will not cannot persist if we realize the power that we have is kind of like the point. But yes, there are definitely conspiracies. There will continue to be because that's how power maintains itself. That's how markets maintain themselves. That's how people maintain advantages in industry. It's just part of the deal.
When you present these issues that you are very believe in, believeth in and like to share this with other people, what are people's reactions when they hear what you preach and kind of the message that you give to people? What's been the overall feedback you received?
I think that kind of run into two kind of groups of people. I think some people are just kind of like completely blown away or haven't thought about things the way that I do or aren't kind of in touch with the perspective, or they might have, kind of um, differing perspective, which is kind of like important because it's about kind of having dialogue. It's about discussing viewpoints. It's about contrasting, gaining perspective, and again, all of these viewpoints, or really all of us, we're here, we're on this kind of journey, right? We're learning as we're going, we're experiencing things. And my viewpoint on topics change all the time. I mean, maybe not all the time, but I gain new insight, I gain new perspective. I think about things differently because at the end of the day, it's all a collective, individuated experience, right? It's about everybody having their experience, then us learning from that in relation to your own individual experience, right? Then I also get the people who are kind of like have gotten, or rather already are kind of in tune with what I'm talking about and know that a lot of what I'm saying aligns with what their beliefs are, or have been given kind of a foray into a lot of these topics, but I maybe didn't have as much of kind of like my angled perspective on it, or are able to use some of it and kind of like open up their eyes differently. So, it's kind of, those are kind of like the two typical experiences that I have. Net net, I've always gotten kind of positive reception because, and obviously like this is a short show, and it's tough to kind of like dig deep into all of these topics to kind of, and these are deep topics, right? This isn't like we're kind of like giving a highlight reel here, a very high level discussion here, right? So, which I think again, it's kind of like the importance of and why I wrote my book, because it allows people to dive deep. It allows people to kind of make the connections between, these systems that we occupy, whose consciousness we embody, and what that means for ourselves, our sense of self, our lives, and how we can, again, kind of regain control over our consciousness, and evolve. Because at the end of the day, it's about improving our own experience, and then, you know, humanity's experience. That should be what it's about. If that's not what it's about, then I think that we're, doing the wrong thing.
Where do you see these issues in 10 years from now? Do you see these problems getting better? Do you see them getting worse?
I think, no, I think that, and I spoke to this earlier, I think that these platforms, these discussions, I think that we're really ushering in now a a real evolution of consciousness. I think that people are again becoming aware of these topics, and that people are growing, they're learning, they're getting more curious about these, and they're looking to understand, again, the bedrock, the infrastructure of our world, right? And I think it's through these discussions that change takes place. I think that the only way that you're able to really enact change is through shifting perspective and shifting consciousness, and allowing people to care about topics that we're discussing, and also believe that they can have a real impact. Because you can talk about these topics all you want, right? But if they feel out of reach, if they feel like people, if the person doesn't feel like they can do anything about it, it's just kind of like it's a good conversation piece. But if they understand kind of where they play a role in it, where they can enact real change, I think that's kind of really powerful. And you're seeing this, by the way, slowly materialize in a lot of these kind of areas that we were talking about, like education, for example. People are becoming aware of the limitations of our indoctrination programs in our country, and they're starting other schools where the emphasis is not on sort of this linear basis, this memorization and regurgitation, performative based construct, right? Where there's a focus on more integrated approaches to learning, where children are taught to be curious and to allow their own intuition and curiosity to flourish in a setting, right? You're seeing shifts in the medical space, in the medical industry, with people shying away from the typical kind of like allopathic approach to medicine, where they're turning to more holistic approaches. They're looking at alternative therapies, right? And again, this it doesn't mean that it's kind of like definitively the right way, but just the act of exploring, just the act of looking for alternatives is really what it's about, in my opinion. So I'm positive that, again, we are on the right path. And I've never really seen, in my opinion, I've never really seen historically the kind of level of shift that we're starting to see consciously. Maybe it's kind of like the circles that I'm involved with, but I don't think it is. I think that globally you're seeing an awakening. And whether it happens on a kind of peripheral level, which is what you get kind of like with people seeing government corruption and corporate greed and these different things, it happens across different planes, whether it's deeper with the individual self, or again with these external constructs, it's happening, right? So to me, I'm very positive about that.
How can someone today navigate the tension between inner peace and external chaos?
Yeah, I think that this goes back to, really kind of like finding time for yourself and reconnecting with yourself and really even kind of like learning who you are, right? Outside of the noise. Um, when I say the noise or the external chaos, I mean again, this like push and pull where, you uh, get in the car or driving to work and you put on, music that's sending messages that you don't even realize are being sent. Then, driving past billboards that are trying to sell you something, or, going through, mentally going through the stresses of your day, the tasks that you have to perform at work, the other concerns that you have going on in your schedule, right? So like it's about finding time for yourself. And when you can find time for yourself, you can again regain autonomy, regain sovereignty over your consciousness, over your emotions, over your thoughts, right? Because in truth, no, and I don't know kind of how kind of like metaphysical you've gotten on your path, or kind of like the ways that you've examined kind of your own consciousness. Many people believe that they are their emotions and their thoughts, right? And then as a result, they're kind of like pushed and pulled by them. In truth, we're all experiencing our emotions, we're all experiencing our thoughts. If we can kind of step back from them and say, look, I'm experiencing this, I'm feeling this, but I don't have to have this define me, right? It's hugely powerful, and you get there with again a lot of these introspective practices, um, meditative practices, where you're able to distance yourself from your emotions, from your thoughts, and then kind of see which way you want to go, find the path that's best suited for you, not get pushed and pulled by your external environment, whether it's the person you work with, your parent, your friend, your girlfriend, your wife, the television, the commercial. I mean, all of these different things that are in the background, right? So, um, again, it's about taking back control, and I really kind of like realizing who you are beneath this whole external world.
You know, what's the ultimate outcome that you would like to see among people? And you had mentioned earlier that the book that you're coming out with, Before We Forget, the Guide to Personal and Collective Awakening. What's the main takeaway that you would like readers to get after they after they read the book?
The main takeaway that I want people to get is I want people to kind of reorient, and see themselves as the powerful beings that they are, and to realize that we are really, in truth, we are all connected. In truth, we are not the jobs that we hold. We are not the label that somebody tells you that you are. We are not the job title. We are not the school that we graduated from. We are not the home that we have, the amount of money in our bank account. When people are able to reorient, when people are able to see themselves in truth for what they are, for who they are, for how deeply we connected we are, um, this is when change happens in the world. I talk in my book about revolutions. I talk about how um, the problem with revolutions is that the underlying consciousness of the revolution never changes. If you look at the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, they were all the underlying consciousness never shifted. We never made that step collectively as human beings. And with those revolutions, or with the way that we are structuring a government agency, or the way that we are changing initiatives on a corporate governance level, if we don't change the consciousness, if we don't change the underlying compass of these structures, we're just, I use the metaphor, we're just uh, rearranging the seats in the theater. It's the same show. We're just changing where we're sitting, right? So this is my ultimate goal. My ultimate goal is that we change humanity when we see ourselves and the spaces that we occupy differently. When we have a better sense of who we are by evolving consciously, this is when change happens, and it happens slowly, and it happens over decades of time. But it's kind of like it's my belief that, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And there's all kind of different ways to digest this. Like the movie, like The Matrix, for example, which I think is it's a great metaphor in a lot of ways of what's going on. But like there's a scene I think in the first one where Morpheus says, you know, all of these people in the Matrix are enemies, even though they don't know that they are, and they're enemies because their consciousness is tethered to this, egoic way of thinking, this lower level, lower frequency, lower vibration way of seeing themselves, and this impacts the way that they kind of live in the world around them, and they interact, right? So to me, it's like, look, we need to get people on the same page, and again, it's my core belief that going back to kind of the conspiracy discussion. um, in truth, we are the ones collectively that perpetuate these societal issues. And we're not just kind of we don't just always have the solution, but we create a lot of the problems. These aren't created because there's a few puppet masters. We do this with our egoic minds. We do this when we don't have enough knowledge. We do this when we don't have enough of an understanding of who we are. And also, no, I'm sure you know that. I mean, people go about their whole lives with no real curiosity about who they are, why they're here, what their purpose could be, what they should be doing. I mean, it's blind. People live their life blind to these questions, sleepwalking through the world without a care in the world to have these discussions. And I want to change that, and I want people to realize again that it's through these discussions, through these investigations and introspections that they gain back massive amounts of power and sovereignty ultimately over their life.
Well, I think you have a great message, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people out there that don't really ask these questions or have ever thought about these issues before. And I think the mission that you have going is something that I think a lot of us could really learn from, and I find a lot of people that could probably benefit from it as well. If people would like to learn more about this study, and if they would like to check the book out, where can they find the book when it comes out? And feel free to also mention any social media accounts that you have or websites, whatever you have going on, where people can stay connected with you and learn more about you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So the book is being launched globally on the 13th of October. Very excited about that. It's being launched on Amazon. It's going to be in all, major bookstores as well. It will be also distributed globally across all English speaking countries, which is great. There'll be an audiobook that's going to come out probably the beginning of November, because I know people kind of nowadays aren't always looking to read. They're looking for audiobooks. It's easier, and I get it. I actually
Yeah.
enjoy it as well. So that's kind of the background of the book. The the other kind of platform that I have a podcast that I do, which is not a guest host podcast structure. It's really all just kind of content. I discuss a lot of these issues that we are kind of covered on a more in-depth level. It's called the Evolved Podcast with Aaron Scott. I have a website called theaaronscott.com, where you'll find links to the book, to the podcast, to kind of my background, testimonials, things of that nature. So I'm available. I'm available over email if you want to reach out to me, Aaron at theaaronscott.com. I'm on TikTok. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. I think I'm the Aaron Scott on TikTok and Instagram. Or maybe I'm Aaron Scott official on Instagram. I have to check it out. But yeah, so I'm available across the board, and I'm really excited again about this book, and kind of getting this out into the general the general consciousness. I think that it can really help people, especially those who kind of again aren't looking into these topics and don't realize again where to kind of start. I think it gives a really good framework and a really nice path to awakening.
I'll put all of his links in the description box below. I'll put all of his social media links and all of his detailed information about the book. By the time this episode comes out, the book probably has already been released by the time this episode comes out. So just make sure to check with him to see if the book is out. I'll put I'll make sure to put links to his where you can find it in the description box as well. Feel free to also follow me on social media as well. Instagram and TikTok, Lethal Venom Podcast, and Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, it's Noah's Podcast. So feel free to follow any of those platforms to keep updates about the podcast on the social media side. And as always, listen to Lethal Venom wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm available on all the major platforms: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Pandora. It's everywhere. So feel free to follow the podcast and so that you'll be notified of when new episodes come out. Thank you to everyone for tuning in to today's episode. Hope y'all have a great rest of your day and week. Be safe, make good decisions, and I'll see you on the next episode of Lethal Venom.